out there on YouTube, you can see this, the guy, for them, they tear one apart, and how much the big gears are, and that worm gear motor down there and everything. Great big old thing. You can watch them tear that down real easy and everything. So they've got a lot of rotors out there. I had a bunch of one time here at Pryor. We had a little thing over at Pryor here a couple of years ago, and I had about 10 or 11 Ham M's rebuilt at that same time, and I had them all out on my table, and a buddy of mine said, well, I think you could turn a house with those, as many as you got there. So you can invest a lot of money in the rotors and towers, whatever you want, but I suggest don't try to put a tail twister in a RON 25 tower. It ain't going to work. There's no way. And don't cut the braces off your RON 25s to fit, because then you weaken your tower. You can take all that Z bracing off, and so you start a lot of twisting and turning, and it'll come down. I've seen it happen. Old boy lost a guy wire on a RON 25 and had it up about 10 foot and cut, and it just twisted right there with that weak point and came down. A lot of people want their towers down, or rotors down below where they can work on it on the ground. Well, you got one problem. You got to make sure that whole mast going up through there is symmetrically straight with that. With the RONs, you can take the rotor plates, put them rotor plates down every so often with a bearing and keep it straight that way. But you got to keep that mast coming all the way down pretty well symmetrical, straight up and down, so that'll turn right. You won't be kinking and binding in it. So you got a little more process and thinking, and when you just setting it down there, you got to make sure it's all symmetrically straight coming down that length of that tower, so that will turn correctly instead of trying to be bogging down trying to turn it. So you got to kind of watch that on that. And Herron makes a lot of good rotor boxes and everything for different ones. I noticed High Gain has started coming out with digital rotors boxes. They even make them for the Yaesus now. So you got that. I learned a long time ago, they told me years ago, back before Yaesu come in, Yaesu bought out Kenpro. If you ever remember, heard of Kenpro rotors. Well, Yaesu bought Kenpro out, and that's where Yaesu got started. But they told me years ago, back when I was still CBing, to stay away from that type of rotor because everything was made overseas and it was hard to get parts for it and stuff. So I don't knock Yaesu. I've been asked if I work on them. I said nope, I just work on the High Gains because Yaesu is hard to get parts for and trying to call up and getting them and stuff. So that's why I've been told to stay away from that design, but people can take off and do what they want. That's their prerogative, not and stuff. So I just keep on with working with High Gains. I can get the parts readily, call down there and get all the parts I want all the time. So don't have any trouble unless, like it was here a while back, they broke a tool that made their motors. So it took me a while for them to finally get a new tool made to start getting some motors out. Now it's kind of hard for them now with the motors. They changed the people they're getting the stuff for. Specs are changing, so it's hard to get their specs right and stuff. So I'm having a little bit of trouble getting motors right now, but not too much. But that's about what I've got. Has anybody got any questions and answers?
Fred, now you talked about brakes very briefly, but how critical is a wedge brake?
Real critical. I've had the Ham 3s or Ham M's. I've had them sit there and turn around and just wore out the grooves inside. And what I found was, I didn't know it when it happened to mine. I just tore that apart and used that one for parts for another. But a buddy of mine gave me one, and as I was slowly tearing it apart, there's that little latch that comes down off that wedge that holds that from coming. There's two springs that fit in there and butt up against the plate of the mast of the plate where the bearing races are and motor sets. Those two springs were gone. So that kept that thing to let that flop up, and so that's what lets them run around. But that wedge is really important, and if it fits in there good. I've had one that the old boy at the case said, well, it's a Ham 4. Well, it can been converted to a Ham 4, but it had the wrong wedge in there. and stuff, so I had to go back and redo all of that. But it's easy to make them into ham fours. I like the ham four brakes, cause every old ham M I get now, everybody wants fours, I just convert it over to a four. There's just about 3 parts to change, and I can go from an old ham M to a four real quick. So that wedge is real good, that's why everybody wants a four. The 3 just had that blade type in there. They improved it a little bit, like the 4 on them, to hit that in there better, but the ham 4 wedges are better. They're just like the tail twister. Tail twister is a little bit bigger and thicker, and the wedge going around and hitting, but that's what I like on the tail twister too. Is good because it's got that 3rd row of bearings at the bottom of it. Had one back there.
On your, when you do your loop coming off the mast down to the tower, I found I can get the black spiral type, cable wrap.
Yeah, like the automobiles.
Yeah, well, it's a wrap.
Yeah.
And I bought myself, well, it comes in 25-foot lengths, but I bought myself some 1 1/4 inch. And I found that if I come off the tower with that and wrap all those coaxes down onto the leg of the tower, it's just one bundle, and that plastic takes any abuse that the coax might take.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cheap.
Yeah.
Like 10 or 15, $10 for 25 feet. So, cause I run 3 antennas on my 25 with a tail twister.
Yeah.
I just use the tail twister because of the winds.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we get a lot of wind in Oklahoma, I can tell you that.
Sometimes the clouds have tails too.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with them, but do you work with satellite rotors?
No,
Okay.
but I did have a slide in there, and I didn't come out on this one, but you can make, instead of buying the Yaesus that turns up and everything, as high dollar as they are, you ever seen the cheap Alliance rotors, TV rotors? Take one here, and you can turn it this way. Put another one up on the mast, and it'll turn it this way. The poor boy way of doing it, but you can take them cheap TV rotors, put one up there and turn the other one horizontal, and you can turn your antenna and hit the satellites that way, and you don't have but $200 or $300 in a rotor if you find it real cheap that way and stuff. So that's a good way of making it cheap red satellite antennas. Use 2 Alliance rotors and turn one vertical and one horizontal, and it'll hit your satellites that way.
Probably when they started.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
The worm gear drive, normally you don't need a brake.
No.
So why do they not go that direction?
Because I guess this design is a lot cheaper the way
Oh, yeah.
and everything than putting the worm gear drive in.
It's easier to
It's just
remove
cheaper.
than a worm gear gearbox.
Yeah. Because your worm gear drive, the boxes, you can see these big old rotors are about that big. You have motors in there, and some of them are about like that. So it takes up a lot of space and room. I know a lot of the winches use worm gear drives and stuff too now.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming down, Mr. Goughler. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Thank you.